4. She laughed when they put the handcuffs on me. Not a subtle smile, not quiet satisfaction, a real laugh. Head tilted back, hand on her new husband's arm. 4. The kind of laugh that fills a courtroom and makes baifs exchange glances. Rot in prison, she said, loud enough for the gallery to hear. My new husband and I will spend your millions. 4. She walked out thinking she'd won. What she didn't see, what nobody in that courtroom saw, was the note I'd already slipped to the property buyer sitting in row 3 before they led me away. 4. One number on it, one call that would expose everything. My name is Richard Caldwell, 51 years old, real estate developer from Nashville, Tennessee. 4. I'd built my company across 23 years, from a single residential flip into a portfolio worth approximately $14 million. Commercial properties, residential developments. 4. Land acquisitions across 4 states, built with patience, precision, and the kind of relentless attention to detail that makes people either respect you or underestimate you. 4. Diane had done the latter. We'd been married 9 years. She was smart, beautiful, socially precise. 4. The kind of woman who worked a room like a professional and made everyone feel like the most important person present. I'd love that about her once. Later, I'd understand it was never warmth. 4. It was reconnaissance. The fraud charges against me were meticulous. Forged signatures on property transfers, fabricated investor communications. For a paper trail so carefully constructed that my own lawyer had looked across the table at our first meeting with an expression that told me everything about how it appeared from the outside. 4. Diane had spent 3 years building that case. She'd used my own company to do it, and she'd made absolutely certain that every document pointed in one direction, straight at me. 4. The cell was smaller than my home office closet. I'd spent 23 years building something, properties across 4 states, a company that employed 60 people. 4. A name that meant something in Nashville real estate circles, and it had taken Diane approximately 36 months to dismantle every piece of it with surgical precision. 4. First night in that cell, I didn't sleep, didn't panic either. I lay on that narrow cot, staring at a concrete ceiling, and did what I'd always done when situations turned genuinely dangerous. For I thought backwards, traced every decision, every signature, every meeting, every document back to its origin point, looking for the threat. There's always a threat. Diane was meticulous. 4. I give her that completely. The forged signatures were expert level. 4. The fabricated investor communications had my writing patterns down to specific punctuation habits I'd never consciously noticed myself. 4. The property transfer documents had been filed through 3 separate shell entities specifically designed to collapse under scrutiny and redirect blame upward toward me. 4. But here's what 23 years of real estate development teaches you above everything else. Every structure has a foundation. Find the foundation. Find the weakness. 4. Diane had built an elaborate criminal architecture using my company, my name, my signature, my reputation. 4. But she hadn't built it alone. Someone with serious legal and financial expertise had constructed those shell entities. Someone who understood property law across multiple jurisdictions. 4. Someone who knew exactly which documents to forge and exactly how to file them to survive initial scrutiny. Diane had a business degree and considerable intelligence. 4. She did not have that specific expertise, which meant somewhere there was a partner. And partners, in my experience, always had their own agenda. My lawyer's name was Franklin Cross, 60 years old. 4. Former federal prosecutor turned defense attorney. 4. The kind of man who wore the same style of suit every day because he'd stopped caring about appearances somewhere around his 40th case and started caring exclusively about winning. 4. He visited me on day 4, sat across the visitation table with a legal pad, 2 pens. 4. and the expression of a man who'd heard every version of innocence and had developed a precise internal mechanism for separating genuine from performance. 4. He studied me for a long moment before speaking. The note, he said. Tell me about the note. I'd slipped it to Marcus Webb for a property buyer I'd been negotiating with for 8 months on a commercial development in Franklin County. Good man, methodical, for the kind of buyer who read every clause of every document and ask questions that made lawyers uncomfortable. Exactly the kind of man I needed. One number on it, I told Franklin, for a storage facility in Brentwood, Unit 144. I've had it for 11 years under a separate LLC Diane doesn't know exists. I paused. Everything is in there. Original documents, real signatures, 4 actual transaction records going back to the beginning. I looked at Franklin directly. I kept physical copies of everything I ever signed. Every meeting had a digital recorder running. 4. Every significant call was logged. Franklin's pen stopped moving. Every call, he repeated carefully, including, I said, 14 conversations with Diane's attorney. For the man who drafted the shell entity structures recorded across a 16-month period before any charges were filed. 4. Franklin set his pen down completely, for the first time since we'd met. He smiled. Richard, he said quietly, who else knows about that storage unit? One person, I said, Marcus Webb. For Marcus called the number on day 6. Franklin told me during his next visit, leaned across that visitation table with controlled energy. 4. The specific barely contained momentum of a man who just watched a case turn completely on its axis. He went to the unit, Franklin said. Everything is there exactly as you described. For he opened his legal pad. Richard, I need to ask you something, and I need complete honesty. The recordings, how many total? 47 across 16 months. Franklin exhaled slowly through his nose. 4. And Diane's attorney, Harrison Cole, his voice is identifiable throughout. Identifiable and specific, I said. He walks through the shell entity structure in detail across 3 separate conversations. 4. Explains exactly how the signature forgeries would survive forensic analysis. Discusses the investor communication fabrications. 4. I paused. In the final recording, he references Diane by first name 11 times while outlining the timeline for my arrest. Silence. He knew about the arrest timeline, Franklin said carefully, for he helped design it. Franklin sat back. Harrison Cole was one of Nashville's most prominent real estate attorneys. 30-year career. Bar Association board member. 4. The kind of professional credibility that makes accusations sound absurd before evidence is even presented, which was precisely why Diane had chosen him. There's something else, I said. The new husband, 4. Gregory Marsh, check his previous marriages, specifically the financial outcomes. I looked at Franklin steadily. Diane wasn't my beginning. I wasn't her first. Franklin made a note. 4. How long have you known that? 8 months, I said. I found inconsistencies in her background during a routine business insurance review. Hired an investigator quietly. I paused. 4. Then the charges came before I could act. Franklin closed his legal pad. Richard, how long were you prepared to wait in here before using any of this? 4. I looked at him. However long it took, I said. Some things are worth patience. Franklin filed the motion on a Tuesday. I wasn't there still in county holding. 4. But he called me through the facility phone system that evening and described the courtroom with the precise satisfaction of someone who'd spent 40 years waiting for exactly this kind of moment. 4. Cole was present, Franklin said, representing Diane on a related civil matter. He was sitting at the plaintiff's table when the judge reviewed our preliminary evidence submission. Pause, Richard. 4. I've seen a lot of men go pale in courtrooms. Harrison Cole went a specific shade I've genuinely never witnessed before. The motion cited prosecutorial misconduct, fabricated evidence. 4. And attorney-client privilege violations. It attached 3 of the 47 recordings as preliminary exhibits specifically chosen, Franklin explained, for maximum immediate impact rather than comprehensive disclosure. Save the rest for trial. Always save the rest for trial. 4. The DA's office requested an emergency recess within 40 minutes of receiving the filing. Meanwhile, Franklin's investigator had spent 72 hours pulling Gregory Marsh's history. 4. 2 previous marriages, both ended in divorce following significant asset transfers, one in Atlanta, one in Charlotte. In both cases, 4. Marsh had been introduced to his eventual wife through the same social circles, approximately 18 months before financial irregularities emerged in the husband's businesses. Same pattern, 4. Different cities, different names. Gregory Marsh wasn't Diane's new husband. He was her business partner, possibly her original one. How far back do they go? I asked. We think at least 12 years. 4, Franklin said. Before she met you, he paused. Richard, Diane didn't fall in love with you and eventually decide to betray you. I already knew what was coming. She identified you, I said quietly. 4. And then she introduced herself at the Morrison Group Charity Gala. Franklin confirmed October 2015. We pulled the guest list. 4. Marsh attended the same event. I thought about that evening. Diane in a red dress, the way she'd approached me like it was accidental. Nothing about it had been accidental. 4. Harrison Cole flipped on day 9. Franklin called it the fastest he'd ever seen a 30-year legal career dissolve. 4 hours of federal questioning, and Cole had handed over everything. Emails. 4. Financial records, billing statements showing payments from a shell entity traced directly to Gregory Marsh across a 4-year period. Cole hadn't been Diane's attorney. 4. He'd been Marsh's asset from the beginning. The federal prosecutor assigned to the misconduct investigation was a woman named Sandra Price, 43 years old. 4. The specific kind of relentless that made defense attorneys lose sleep. She called Franklin the morning after Cole's cooperation agreement was signed. She wants to know. For Franklin told me how many recordings exist total. 47. I said she'd like all of them. She can have them the moment my charges are formally dropped. 4. Franklin delivered that message. Sandra Price apparently smiled. 4. He described it as the smile of someone who'd just been handed considerably more than they'd expected and began drafting the paperwork immediately. My charges were dropped on a Friday morning. 4. I walked out of county, holding at 9:15 a.m., wearing the same suit I'd worn into that courtroom 11 days earlier. Franklin was waiting outside with coffee, black, no sugar he'd remembered. 4. And the specific quiet energy of a man who just won something worth winning. Diane doesn't know yet, he said, handing me the cup. I stood in that parking lot, breathing actual air for a long moment. For where is she? I asked. Home? Your home? Technically, she's still in the property, pending civil proceedings. Franklin paused. Gregory Marsh is currently at Nashville International. 4. Flight to Zurich boards in 3 hours. I looked at Franklin. Sandra Price knows. Federal agents are at the gate, he said simply. As of 20 minutes ago, I drank my coffee. 4. Watched the morning traffic move past. And Cole, I asked. Disbarred by end of business today, Franklin said. Bar association moved faster than I've ever seen. 4. Some things I've learned have their own momentum once they start moving. Diane found out on a Saturday morning. 4. I know because Franklin had arranged for the civil asset freeze notification to be delivered personally. Process server front door, 9 a.m. sharp. No warning, no courtesy call, for just a knock in an envelope. And the specific legal language that means everything you thought was yours has stopped being yours effective immediately. I wasn't there. Didn't need to be. 4. But Marcus Webb was parked across the street, not surveilling, just returning some development documents we'd been working on before everything collapsed. 4. And he called me afterward with the kind of detailed description only a methodical man who reads every clause of every document could provide. She read it twice, Marcus said, standing in the doorway. 4. Then she looked up and down the street like she was expecting someone. 4. Pause. Then she called someone. The call lasted about 40 seconds. Then she sat down on her own front step. Gregory Marsh's phone had been seized at Nashville International 40 minutes earlier. 4. She'd called a deadline. Federal charges against Diane came Tuesday. Fraud, conspiracy, money laundering across 3 states. The previous marriages, the Atlanta husband, the Charlotte husband, for both had been quietly contacted by Sandra Price's office. Both had experienced significant business irregularities during their marriages that had never been fully explained. Both agreed to testify. 4. The case against Diane and Marsh was, Franklin explained with considerable understatement, comprehensive. Marsh was extradited from Zurich 6 weeks later. 4. He'd made it as far as the airport hotel before Interpol coordinates were confirmed, checked into his room, ordered room service, and was arrested before the food arrived. 4. 11 days after walking out of county holding, 4. I sat across from Sandra Price in her office and listened to the full architecture of what Diane and Marsh had built together across 12 years. And 4 marriages. 4. It was genuinely impressive in the specific terrible way that only truly committed destruction can be. Part 8, final clapperboard. Diane received 12 years. Gregory Marsh received 16. 4. The additional 4 reflecting his role as architect rather than participant. For the man who designed the framework across 4 marriages and 3 states and considered it a sustainable business model until a storage unit in Brentwood made it unsustainable permanently. 4. Harrison Cole was disbarred, convicted of conspiracy and fraud, received 4 years with eligibility for early release contingent on continued cooperation. Last I heard, he was writing a memoir nobody had agreed to publish. The $14 million, my company, my portfolio, my 23 years, came back through civil recovery proceedings over the following 18 months. 4. Not all of it immediately. Asset recovery is slow, methodical, occasionally maddening work. But Franklin was patient, and Sandra Price was relentless. 4. And Marcus Webb turned out to be not just a good buyer, 4, but a genuinely decent man who'd held those recordings in that storage unit without once considering how much they might be worth to the wrong person. 4. I bought him lunch when it was all over. He seemed slightly embarrassed by the gesture. I thought a lot about that courtroom moment since then. Diane laughing, the handcuffs, the Baff's face, for the weight of that note between my fingers as I pressed it into Marcus's palm. Small, folded, carrying everything. People ask if I'm angry. Honestly, I'm grateful. Grateful I kept records. For grateful, I trusted instinct enough to prepare for betrayal before betrayal arrived. Grateful for Franklin's experience, Sandra's precision, Marcus's decency. 4. Grateful mostly that I understood something Diane never did. The most dangerous man in any room isn't the loudest one. It's the one who's already 3 steps ahead while everyone else is still reacting. 4. She'd laughed walking out of that courtroom, spent 11 days believing she'd won. On day 12, federal agents knocked on her door at 9 a.m., and the only thing left of her plan was a note, 1 number, for 1 call. That changed everything.